The Fast and Furious franchise has been tearing up the streets for a quarter of a century now. Its stories have evolved from street racing to saving the world, and most important, family. But is that enough? Today, ScreenRant is going under the hoods and seeing what the problems are.
What we gonna do? Hijack a space shuttle?
That's exactly what we're gonna do.
The Fast and Furious franchise began as a love letter to street racing, car culture, and underground crime. The 2001 original The Fast and the Furious introduced audiences to a world of neon-lit races, nitrous-fueled engines, and characters who had as much grit as their custom souped-up rides. It wasn't trying to change the world of cinema, but its unique mix of action, style, and emotional stakes made it a surprise hit. Vin Diesel's Dominic Toretto, the late Paul Walker's Brian O'Connor, and the rest of the crew became instantly iconic, connecting with audiences who appreciated the raw intensity of car culture. In the first few movies, the formula remained relatively simple. It was all exciting street races, undercover investigations, and the recurring theme of loyalty and family. The franchise chose to branch out a little in the mid-2000s with Fast and Furious, Tokyo Drift, stepping away from the US to introduce some international flair. Then Fast 5 reinvented the series as a high-octane action heist blockbuster. The latter is widely regarded as the franchise's peak, where the perfect balance of daring stunts, character development, and clever plotting elevated it beyond expectations. But with Fast 5, the seeds of excess were also planted. The bank vault heist scene, while exhilarating, marked a turning point. This was no longer just a series about skilled drivers, it was a spectacle-driven action franchise. As the films got bigger, the storylines, and by proxy, the stunts became increasingly ridiculous. By the time we reached Fast and Furious 6 and Furious 7, the franchise was defying the laws of physics at every turn, relying on CGI-heavy action sequences to one-up itself with every new release. The tonal shift alienated some longtime fans, with some critics pointing out that the charm of the earlier films lay in their relatability. They focused on characters who lived on the fringes of society, connected by a shared love of speed and adrenaline. After Fast 5, it felt like the franchise traded in its authenticity for Hollywood excess. It went from admiring skilled custom car builders and celebrating their racing abilities to somehow using cars to save the world. By the time Fast 9 arrived, the franchise had entered full-blown parody territory.
We're in outer space! Told you numbers don't lie.
Tej and Roman literally launch a car into space. Yes, you remember that right, space. While the franchise can never be accused of taking itself particularly seriously, it weirdly takes the addition of absurdity too far. Some fans were amused by the sheer ridiculousness of it all, but others were left scratching their heads. How did we go from illegal street races to characters who are essentially invincible superheroes? This escalation of scale comes at a cost. The emotional weight that defined the earlier films has all but disappeared. The tragic death of Paul Walker left a gaping hole in not only the franchise, but in the hearts of many of the cast and crew who worked with him. Brian O'Connor's send-off in Furious 7 was beautifully handled, blending real-world tragedy with a heartfelt in-universe farewell. For many fans, it felt like this was not only the perfect ending for Brian, but it could have been a tasteful closing for the series as a whole. However, in their wisdom, Universal Pictures opted to keep the franchise going, and without Paul Walker's influence, the franchise lost its grounding. And it shows. The movies released after Furious 7 visibly struggled to justify their existence. With each movie, the plots became increasingly contrived, relying on rehashed themes of betrayal, redemption, and of course the all-important family.
I got family.
Dom's loyalty to his crew is challenged time and again, but he constantly comes through in the end. When the lead characters don't change, and the plots aren't that varied, the stakes feel hollow, especially when you know the main characters always emerge unscathed. As soon as the Fast and Furious franchise leaned into its own absurdity and became a self-aware parody, there was very little effort made by the studio or the writers to ground its storylines in any semblance of reality.
Maybe.
Which brings us to the issue of tone. The earlier movies worked to strike a delicate balance between high adrenaline antics and serious moments. But now, the franchise has turned so heavily towards ridiculous stunts that even when there are sentimental, serious moments, the audience don't take them in as such. The submarine chase in The Fate of the Furious and the magnet truck stunts in Fast 9 are prime examples. These sequences are visually spectacular but lack the tension and stakes that made earlier films so gripping. The characterization has also suffered. Dom, for example, started out as a compelling anti-hero with a moral code, but he has now been reduced to being a walking meme. His constant mumbling about family has turned into a comedic catchphrase devoid of meaning. Other long-standing characters such as Letty, Roman, and Tej are stuck in a perpetual loop where they cycle through the same tired, quippy banter and predictable arcs. Charlize Theron's Cypher was introduced as a tech-savvy mastermind, but her character quickly devolved into a generic villain who loves spouting bland monologues about power. With the changes made to the franchise over the past 25 years, and with the addition of spin-offs, we really need to ask, who is Fast and Furious trying to appeal to nowadays? When the series began, it was laser-focused on a niche audience. The franchise grew off the back of the popularity of Gone in 60 Seconds. Car enthusiasts and action fans alike flocked to see the movies. The sleek visuals, modded rides, and underground races spoke directly to a subculture that wasn't often represented on the big screen. The early films were a celebration of the tuner scene. Every car had a personality, and every race had weight. But over time, the franchise decided to shift its focus to a broader, global audience to make a bigger profit. The car culture that once defined Fast and Furious was pushed aside in favor of explosive action set pieces and high-stakes crime plots, so the stories could try to compete with the likes of Mission Impossible. The newer films treat cars as disposable tools for pulling off increasingly insane stunts. When cars are being flung into buildings or used to drag helicopters out of the sky, the connection to car culture is gone. Despite its shift, the franchise is still struggling to compete in today's cinematic landscape. With the rise of superhero blockbusters and spy thrillers, Fast and Furious feels increasingly out of place. Audience preferences have changed, and though the stunts are bigger, the storytelling hasn't evolved to match. To be brutally honest, the franchise should have ended with Furious 7. There was a natural conclusion with the film, giving a heartfelt farewell to Paul Walker and providing a believable, satisfying resolution for the main characters meant it struck the perfect balance between action and emotion, leaving fans with a sense of closure. But instead of going out on a high note, the series has continued to spiral into absurdity. Each new installment feels like a desperate attempt to outdo the last, with increasingly ridiculous stunts and repetitive, paper-thin plots. While these movies still make money at the box office, the creative well has clearly run dry. Even fans of the movies are now suffering from franchise fatigue. Splitting the Fast X finale into multiple parts makes it abundantly clear that the studio is squeezing every last drop out of the series. But at what cost? In many ways, Fast and Furious has become a victim of its own success. The desire to keep the franchise alive has led to diminishing returns, both creatively and emotionally. The films no longer feel like a celebration of car culture or a tribute to family. They feel like cash grabs designed to appeal to the lowest common denominator, with plots that make them the movie equivalent of low-grade pulp novels that people enjoy ironically. So, should the franchise have called it quits by now? Many fans would argue that it's long overdue. The series has already peaked, and continuing to churn out sequels has tarnished what little legacy it has left. With Fast X Part 2 being the true finale of the franchise, for now at least, we can only hope that Dom is finally allowed to retire with his family. What do you think? Has Fast and Furious run its course, or does the franchise still have something to offer? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching Screen Rant. Be sure to like and subscribe for all your movie news.